Howdy, friends, and welcome to Gardening on the Gulf Coast series. This program is brought to you by Aggie Horticulture, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and a team of Aggie horticulturists serving our best interest and improving on the skills that you already have in gardening and horticulture. We do have a request of you if you're joining us today. We request that you mute your microphone and mute your camera as well. It will facilitate the streamline the program a lot more efficiently for the presenter as a courtesy to the presenter, as well as a courtesy to your fellow registrants for this program. We look forward to hosting more of these programs. Today, we're offering soil amendments for gardens and raised beds. This will be provided to you by Horticulture Agent in Jefferson County, David Oates. David will be discussing how soil amendments can help you get the most out of your home garden and raised beds. But before I turn it over to David, I wanted to remind everyone that this program is being recorded. So we think you will have an opportunity after this program, if you've joined us today and are busily writing notes but would like a little bit more information, we will be sending out a link to a copy of the recorded presentation from today. David will also be providing you a survey. After the program, we want to keep an eye on the quality of the programs that we're providing to you. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, David. Take it away.
All righty, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday edition of our Gardening on the Gulf Coast. We hope that these programs have been educational and informative for you guys. We feel like this is something that is really good. It's a good program. We've covered a lot of topics. We hope that they're relevant. We try to give, homeowners and other professionals, lots of good information and, different topics. If you've seen some of the other ones, we've covered everything from citrus to trees to lawns and gardens. So everything is important. Just, you may not be a garden person or, a tree person or a soil person, but everything that we've talked about is vitally important. And so if you do have questions, like I said, my moderators here are going to be Boone and then Stephen Bergerhoff here. They did a great job. Stephen, great job introduction. That sounds like a professional introduction. I like it. Makes me feel better. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint this morning. So if you'll give me just 1 second, we're going to go ahead and switch the PowerPoint over, and give me 1 second. It's thinking here. Okay. So I think everybody can see that. Let's see if we can make it bigger, and let's go back. All right, can everybody see that screen? Stephen, yep. Can y'all see that?
Yes, sir. I see it just fine.
Okay. Do I need to make it bigger?
No, sir. I think that's plenty fine.
Is that going to be okay for everyone? They can see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. So again, good morning, everybody. I hope that everybody's had a great weekend. Welcome to, like I said, another session of our Gardening on the Gulf Coast. I've really enjoyed working on these programs. I think this is a great program to get a lot of exposure to different aspects of different topics about horticulture. So if you do have questions, please use the chat feature. Boone and Stephen Bergerhoff are doing a great job moderating. If you do have a question and we do need to stop, Boone and Stephen, please interrupt me. You will not hurt my feelings. I'll try to go through this fairly at a good pace. I don't want to, lag down and get stuck and waste a lot of time on something that's not important. But if we did miss something, we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So go back. So if you do have questions at the end, there is some of my contact information. My email is there, as well as my phone number. If you want to call me and visit with me, I would love to do that as well. Does not hurt my feelings. You can call myself or any of these ag agents on here. We would love to visit with you. If you do have a specific question about your county or something very particular, Like I said, we are multiple agents, multiple areas, so we would love to help you out any way we can. So this morning we're going to talk about soil amendments for gardens and raised beds. That's probably one of the most important things that we talk about when we talk about gardening. In this first slide, and I just threw this slide up here, it says all soils are not created equally. And I hope everybody understands that. Depending on your location, where you're at in the state, I know we have folks probably in different parts of the state, but here even in our Gulf Coast region, our soils are not the same. They vary widely from place to place. Where I'm at here in Beaumont area, I deal with clay soils. Believe it or not, right along the coast, I have heavy clay soils that are just sometimes almost unbearable to deal with, what I think. But if you get right along the coast, let's say in Galveston, you're going to have sand. So, and if you go further inland, you may have a good sandy clay loam. So all soils are not created equally, but it varies from place to place in the state. And given your location, you may have great soil already, or you may have some soil that you need to work with and maybe to amend. So that's what we're going to talk about, are some of the amendments that we have and what we work with. But there's several things that we can do as well to have really good garden soil. I know nothing frustrates us more than trying to have a good garden, or maybe a flower bed or something like that, and the soil is just really hard to work with. You get poor results. Your vegetable gardens or whatever, very hard to deal with. So, like I said, if you do have to amend it, there are some things that we can do to improve it. And I always like to tell people, don't put your cart before your horse. If you go out and spend $100 on vegetable plants and try to plant in some really poor soil, you're going to have a lot of wasted time and money. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if we had the ideal soil, and this is in a perfect world, which doesn't exist, I'm just going to tell you, it would be an ideal equal amount of sand, silt, and clay and organic matter in equal amounts. So if we were to do a pie chart, it would be basically 25% sand, 25% silt, 25% clay, and a little bit of organic matter, and then the other half would be an equal amount of airspace and water. We'll show you a chart in just a minute. But it would be uniformly mixed, maybe to about 1 to 1.5 feet deep. No drainage issues whatsoever. If it rained, it would hold the water. It would be great for the plants and everything like that. Unfortunately, you guys know as well as I do, that just doesn't exist. But we can improve it. We can make it better. So we can manipulate our soil and help things get along and go from there. Like I said, no soil is ideal, but we can improve it with a few amendments. Okay, so here's a good little chart that shows you a ideal representation of what should be in your soil. You should have probably a good 50% of it, or give or take, of sand, silt, and clay. And then you should have some organic matter in there as well. But you'll notice that's only 50% of what you're seeing. The other 50% is usually water and airspace. If you have too much water, let's say you have a flood. Some of us have been really hammered by the floods in the last couple of years. We've had lots of hurricanes and flood events. And so when you have water that basically stands for days or weeks on end, that soil becomes saturated. You have no more airspace. It's all been, removed and replaced by water. That changes the soil composition quite a bit. That makes the soil a lot harder to deal with, and it does affect what can grow in your soil, whether that be your lawn or your garden or things like that. But if you were to just, like I said, take a ideal soil picture and you could just basically create the perfect soil, this is what it should look like. About half of it should be your organic material and your components, and then about 25% should be water and 25% should be air. So think about that when you have some really challenging soil, such as a clay soil or maybe even a beach sand. You may not have that exact mixture, so you're going to have to work with it and get to somewhere along those lines. And again, this is just a general representation of the ideal soil. Okay, so let's just jump in here real quick and talk about some soil amendments and what types we can have. So obviously we can have organic or inorganic. We're going to go on the assumption that y'all guys know what organic and inorganic means. Does anybody need a clarification on that at this point?
No
All right.
questions so far, David.
No questions?
That's correct.
Okay, good deal. All right. So why do we add soil amendments? I mean, what's the purpose of them? So basically, we can do a lot of things with our soil amendments depending on what we need to achieve out of it. We can add soil amendments to improve the texture, water retention, drainage, or aeration. I'm going to use my clay soils here in the Beaumont area as a great example. They are excellent at holding water, flat out. Whenever we get a lot of rain and we have a heavy clay soil, we have issues with too much water. So the clay soils are really good at holding water. So we need to address things to basically mitigate water retention, how to, not hold so much water sometimes. Drainage is a big thing as well. Like I said, we fight a lot of drainage issues here in my location here in Beaumont and Jefferson County, just because of our clay soil. 180-degree swap. Let's say you go right down on the coast, maybe to Sabine Pass or Galveston, something like that, or the beach. Water is a different thing. Water can flow right through those sandy soils. When you think about it, how often have you seen a mud puddle or standing water on top of the beach sand? Not very often. That sandy soil there at the beach drains extremely well. In fact, you probably have to water more often just because of that, because it dries out so quick. So soil amendments can go very quickly. They can change very quickly from location to location. So if you have a sandy or a rocky soil, they can require more amendments for texture improvement and addition water retention. So let's say out in West Texas or Central Texas, you have more sandy, rocky soils. You need to add amendments to hold the water capacity. So you need to increase the water capacity. Here in East Texas, maybe Southeast Texas, clay-based or some good sandy loams, we need to look at things like texture, aeration, and then, drainage in certain locations. So those are some of the things for soil amendments. Let's see. All right, I know we've all seen this wonderful triangle. If you can remember back maybe to your college days or your high school days, talking about earth science and things like that. Tons and tons of questions. You always remember seeing this soil triangle. And once you understand how it works, it makes sense. But basically, when we say a soil is maybe 50% sand or maybe a clay or a loam, this is the percentage and how it breaks down. I know you guys have all heard people say, well, I've got silt in a location, or let's say my garden or my drainage spot is real silted in, or it's got lots of silt. So that would mean that it's probably 100% silt. And basically, you guys remember what silt is? I'm gonna look at my notes, make sure I tell you exactly. All right, so if you're looking at, say, it's talking about silt, basically silt is the fine sediment of sand, silt, and clay that's carried by water. If we have a flood, we have a lot of lakes and rivers and streams that maybe silt in. My example that I can think of, probably the best suits me, is the Natchez River here, has silted in from all the materials that are moving downstream. So periodically the Corps of Engineers comes in and dredges the rivers. So that's talking about dredging that for removing some of the silt that has built up over time. Inland, we have a lot of clay to look at. We have a lot of agriculture here in Jefferson County, especially rice farming and turf grass production. So they use a clay soil that works great for water retention. A lot of people fuss at the clay and say it's no good. It's just, can't use it. It's very nutrient rich. It's just very dense, so it does hold a lot of water. That is a drawback. But again, you may be on the coast and look at where they have nothing but beach sand. A lot of our beach sand is very porous, drains very well, but it does not have a lot of mineral and nutrient capability in holding that material. So you may have a very coarse soil that is very poor in nutrient load as well. So it does vary from time to time. But I wanted to just show you guys this soil triangle and what it looks like in terms of, relationship percent clay, silt, and then sand. A lot of people in my area use a filler sometimes in their yard if they need to build up a house pad. They use what we call a 60-40. And again, sometimes that's just what it says. It's a 60% sand or 40% clay. So they use that as a filler sometime to build up maybe a house pad or things like that. So be careful sometimes if you are having to go purchase sand or silt, make sure you know what you're getting. You don't want all clay for a garden, and you don't want all sand for a garden, but you do want a good mixture. So you are looking for something that's probably in the middle of this triangle, maybe a medium loam to a sandy clay loam. And again, depending on your location, may vary from place to place. But I would definitely, if you're looking at this clay triangle, try to stay in that middle section right along in there where it's sandy clay loam and then a good medium loam. So that's really an ideal type of soil. Okay.
David,
Question? Yes, sir.
Oh, this is perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
The question earlier was right here on inorganic amendments. Can you just define real quickly the difference between organic and inorganic and by definition?
Okay. Let's see. I think I can. Let me go to the next slide because I think that's what we're going to talk about it. Is that okay? I think I'm working straight into that, if that's okay.
Perfect.
All right, let me see. There's that. All right, so there's the organic amendments. So to answer that question really quick, and I think this will be perfect. So basically, an inorganic compound and an organic compound, basically one is living or was living and one is not living. So your inorganic are basically your minerals. And here's a great list of examples, and we'll talk about these exactly. So some inorganic would be sand, some lime, sulfur, shale, perlite, and vermiculite. So these are all considered inorganic. And when we talk about inorganic, basically it is a material that is broken down, that is a rock or a mineral formation. Does that kind of answer that question? I think so.
Perfect.
Okay, good deal. I think we were right there on top of it. Good deal. All right, so let's just talk about some of the common inorganic amendments that we normally see in some of our garden soils. Obviously, the biggest one is sand, and just so you know that there are multiple types of sand. All sands are not created equal, so that's my common goal, I guess, and theme today. But if you are going to get some sand to put into your existing soil, or maybe you're building up some good garden soil, you want to choose a sand that is basically what we call a yellow sand or a builder sand. You don't want to use beach sand or playbox sand. A lot of times you'll go to the store and they'll have sand in bags or things like that. And sand has very specific uses. So the playbox sand is very coarse, and it's almost like beach sand. It has a lot of quartz material and silicon dioxide. It's pretty rocky. If you've taken a handful of sand and rubbed it between, it's real gritty. You really don't want to use that type of sand if it's possible in your garden. It just won't work very well. So try to get what we call a coarse sand, or maybe like a yellow sand is what they call it a lot of places as well. But if you just go and get playbox sand, I don't know that would really do a lot of what you're looking to do. Another inorganic amendment is lime. A lot of people like to add lime to their garden, and the main thing that this does is it raises your pH. So if you're very acidic, say you're in the 4 or 5 maybe, and you want to be up around 6 on the pH scale, addition of lime to an area will definitely help raise the pH. All right. Lime is basically it's basically a ground up limestone is what it is. And so limestone is one of the things that we find naturally. And limestone is basically calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. Those are its elements. And it basically will raise your pH if you basically add it to your soil. So, for example, here in East Texas, we don't have a lot of limestone in our soil, so our pHs are a little bit lower. You go out West Texas, they do have a lot of limestone, and their pHs are a little bit higher, simply due to the fact that they do have naturally occurring limestone in the soil. So if you do need to raise your pH, the addition of lime is a great opportunity to do that. You can get it in a powder form or a granular form. Probably for the garden, I would use a ground up form. I think it works better. The big thing about lime is that it's not going to be a immediate change in your pH. It's going to be gradually. So a lot of people like to add limestone and think it's going to be just, very immediate, very quick. Maybe snap of a finger, you're going to jump that pH up there. It does take time to raise the pH, so just be aware of that. Okay. Sulfur. This is the one that will actually lower your pH. Let's say you've got a super high pH and you actually want to lower it. You can do the addition of sulfur. That does really good. So basically, when you add sulfur to your soil, the bacteria basically changes the bacteria sulfide to a sulfuric acid. So the bacteria that's in your soil already basically will break down and go to like a sulfuric acid, lowering that soil. Again, I don't think it's very rapid changing on the pH. You may get a faster pH than not, but be very careful when you do use a lot of sulfur because you can lower your pH too much sometimes. So be careful lowering your pH if you're trying to lower it. Most of our pHs in this immediate area, or at least mine here in the Beaumont, Southeast Texas area, are in the mid sixes, things like that. And that's pretty common. Every now and then I will run across a pH that a homeowner has added a lot of nutrients to the soil or something like that, and they may be in the high sevens. To be honest, I've never really encountered a very high pH soil, say in the 8 or 9s. I think 8 is about as high as I've ever seen, but the sulfur, addition of sulfur will help lower that to where you need to be. All right. Expanded shale. This is a fairly new product. I ran across this a couple of years ago, and I think it's going to be a great product to use. So basically, the expanded shale is a shale product, very similar to limestone. This is a Texas product. Basically, there is a band of shale that is found all the way from, I think, Texarkana over to Corsicana, maybe out west a little bit, but it's a very small blue type limestone type product, but it is a shale product. And basically it's a ground up shale that increases soil aeration and water infiltration. So if you do have a lot of a lot of clay soil, it is important to use a good product like this in your soil to help improve soil aeration. That's the biggest thing with clay soil that we run across, especially my area, is basically soil aeration and then water infiltration. So if you do have those bigger particles, and I'm going to show you guys a picture of it in just a minute, and you'll see why you think it does help. But this is a good product to use for gardens and things like that. It does improve your aeration and water infiltration. All right, 2 more real quick on inorganic, and I'll show you some pictures. Perlite. Basically, the main thing of this one is to improve porosity and water retention. All right, so perlite, if you guys have all looked at it, looks like the styrofoam material that you see in a lot of potting media. It's not styrofoam, even though we think it is. It is a porous, pumice, volcanic type of glass. So it's actually a superheated glass volcanic rock. And if you picked it up, a 50-pound bag may not weigh very much. It's very lightweight. A lot of times when we do a lot of potted plants in potting soil, you see a lot of perlite in that as well. Very lightweight, very porous, great for water retention just because of its structure. One drawback, if you do put this into your garden, it always seems to tend to float to the top if you use a lot of perlite. If you've watered a house plant on numerous occasions, you always tend to have a big clump of white perlite sitting on the top. It does tend to float to the top, so that is one thing to think about if you do use a lot of it. But it is a good product to use on the perlite. The next one is vermiculite. Vermiculite, to me, I'll be honest with you, it's kind of silly. It looks like some fool's gold. It's almost a flaky type mineral. Comes off in flakes, but at first glance, it looks like gold. And if you've ever seen like a gold or silver material in your potting soils or your soils, that's vermiculite. Basically, it's a dried mineral. It doesn't rot, so basically it will not degrade anymore. It doesn't deteriorate, so basically it's going to be a lifelong material in your soil, and it will break down. But like I said, there's no rot to it, no deterioration with the soil. So that's a good product to use for as well for aeration and water retention. All right, I've got some pictures I want to show you guys real quick. All right, so here are some pictures of the materials that we talked about for inorganic amendments. That's going to be a mouthful. So here you see some sand. And this is a good quality, clean sand. Depending on your location, you may get what some people call it river sand or things like that. But make sure if you do use sand that it is a good, clean source of sand. A lot of places will sell you, sand by the bulk. And it's fine to use in a lot of your amendments, but just make sure that it's a good, clean quality, maybe has been screened to take out any weeds or anything like that. And here's a picture of the expanded shale. You'll notice that the color of it a lot of times is blue, and it has a lot of blue to red hues to it. But basically, it is a shale product that has been cleaned and heated, and it works great with clay soils. All right, the next one is lime. This is a powdered form, but basically this is ground up limestone. It's pulverized limestone. And again, remember what we said about our lime. It's used to raise your pH. So if you have a very acidic soil and you need to get it up, that would be what you need to add for your raising your pH. Here is an example of perlite. Notice how it's white and it's fluffy. A lot of times you see this in your materials, your especially potted materials like potting soils. I do see it in some of your commercial garden soils, very few, but it's very light, very fluffy. So that's what it looks like, almost like styrofoam pellets, but it's not styrofoam. This one is vermiculite. If you'll notice the gold tint, just on inspection, it kind of looks like gold. So, if you have really high quality soil, I always like to tell people that's some good soil, but it has a lot of good retention and water porosity material. As well. And then the last one is sulfur. This is pelletized sulfur. This is a great way to lower your pH, but this, like I said, this is pelletized. Usually it's in granular form, but this is a pelletized form as well. So that's what it looks like. So quite a bit of difference in what you're adding to the soil in terms of shapes and sizes and formations, but each one has a specific function on the inorganic side. All right.
Michael,
any
David,
questions, Spoon, at that
yes,
point?
David, we have a few questions.
Yeah.
Unknown user, a participant asked what about using small pebble stones instead of sand as an amendment?
How small are we talking about? Like a fine gravel?
Well, the user didn't specify that information, so we'll have to just kind of extrapolate.
Okay. I would answer, depending on the size of and you're saying like pebbles or rock. Is that what what I'm assuming?
The user just specified in the chat function. They suggested gravel. So what about using gravel instead of sand?
I've never used gravel in any of mine. That's an interesting question. We have to come back to that one. You could, I guess you could, if you have a very heavy, a heavy soil. I would be cautious as to use like a gravel because it may not break down and decompose into smaller particles. So that would be my only concern on that. That's an interesting question. Depending on the gravel, maybe the location. If you have a very gravelly soil to already start with, but I know sounds like she's trying to add it to the soil for aeration. I'm assuming for aeration, correct?
I believe that's why the question. Yes.
That was an interesting question. We may have to circle back to that one. All right, so let's go and look at the. Did that answer the question, or you have more questions?
Just one more question
Sure.
for the moment. Another participant asked where they can get shale. So you mentioned adding expanded shale. Would that depend on their locality?
Yes, it is kind of hard to find. I only have one feed store where I am that carries it, but probably not going to be at your big box stores yet. If you're in the Dallas area, I would say probably you're going to have a better chance of finding it. But in this area, I know they probably have some places in College Station that carry it. I have a feed store or two that carry it, but any really good a feed store can order it. My feed store can orders it for me. But if you have a garden center, they may not carry it bulk. It's probably still going to be in bags. Like I said, this is a fairly new product even for my use. But like I said, it's interesting. I only can find it a couple places. I don't think it's kind of gaining a whole lot of popularity yet, but it is increasing. Check with your really good, super mom and pop nurseries. They can probably get it for you, or try your feed stores, where I would suggest looking for stuff like that. But I have not seen this at the box stores yet, unfortunately.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Good question. Okay, so let's do 180 degrees and let's talk about some common organic amendments. All right. So I'm going to run down the list real quick, and then we'll come back and talk about them real quick. All right. Let me change my screen. My little bar is right there in the middle of my screen. Are y'all seeing the bar as well? Is that in the way, or do y'all see my bar or not? My little task bar?
No, sir.
Okay. It's just mine then. Okay. So some of the organic amendments, and to answer the question we had before, basically an organic material is something that was living that is broken down into smaller pieces or materials, and it still may be it was a living product at one time, and basically has broken down into a different form. So when we talk about organic amendments, obviously we talk about manures, we talk about compost, a mulch, a humus, we talk about peat moss, and then we talk about wood products. So these are some of the organic materials that you can add to your soil. All right, so on manures, obviously the big thing on manures is that they add nutrients. Not all manures are created equal, so be very careful as to what you use for manures. Most common, I think, would be horse manure, cow manure. A lot of people use lamb or goat manure sometimes, rabbit manure, and some of us even use chicken litter or chicken manure, chicken litter. All these add nutrients to the soil, but you do have to be careful when you do use a manure. You want to make sure that it is well finished or well composted. You don't want a super fresh product. Normally you like to let it sit and go through a heating process, and that kills some of the bacteria as well. If you use a fresh manure, sometimes, depending on, like, say, a cow manure, a lot of times it's been heated and sterilized, and kind of goes from there. I just know you be very careful using certain manures that are not fully composted or have been aged, is a good word, I think would be to say. But we'll talk about manures and compost a little bit more in just a minute. But like I said, do avoid trying to use fresh manure from, like, say, chickens. Chicken does have a lot of, it's very what we call hot manure. So it's hard to utilize it as a very hard manure. Oop, I went too far. All right. So compost, real quick. I could do a whole section on compost, literally, and I think I probably will talk about a lot of composting. That's something that I can do a whole session on, literally, and I probably have for a lot of my master gardeners. I teach a whole section on compost, just compost itself. So basically, Compost is your leftover materials from your garden or what you've eaten. It's the garden scraps is what we like to call it. You can use shredded newspaper, materials like that. So it's paper, garden scraps. Certain food scraps can also be used in the compost. Leaves, very fine ground up leaves, limbs and materials like that all break down and go from there. Certain food things you don't want to put in your composting pile. If you do have a compost, obviously you don't want to put anything that will attract ants in your compost. Things like meat byproducts. Sometimes a lot of dairy products aren't good for the compost. Things you can use in a compost if you're composting your food scraps. Vegetable scraps, banana peels, leftover, say, lettuce or things like that are great to add to it because they break down very quickly. Just stay away from anything that will attract ants. A lot of times they seem to be attracted to that. So no fatty foods in your compost, things like that. Like I said, I could talk probably a whole session on compost. But basically the purpose of a soil, compost is to improve your soil texture, water retention, and then you do add some nutrient back to your soil. So it is kind of a multi-purpose material. And this is probably one of the best things to add to your garden soil if you have it available. You can make your own, obviously, if you have a compost pile, or you can buy it. A lot of people like to buy it just because it's easier to handle. It's ready-made. When you do buy compost, look for a good quality compost. A lot of people will sell you compost that is not what we call completely finished. It's almost like a barky, chunky material. And you may have to add some material to that to get it to where you need it. It may be not 100% usable as a good compost in your vegetable garden or things like that. You can use mulch. Here in my area, I tell you the best thing that I use is black pine bark mulch that has been ground up very fine. We've all seen our pine trees. If you take that pine bark and shred it into very fine pieces, about the size of a nickel or smaller, very small pieces, you can add that to the soil as well. I haven't really used a lot of other mulches in my soils, such as like a cedar mulch. I have not. A lot of people will do oak and things like that. I'd really just stay with pine bark just because that's what I've grown up using, and it works really good. You can get most of your mulch, things like that. Most of your stores, feed stores, big box stores will sell it. Be careful when you do get mulch that you know where it came from. A lot of times people will sell you mulch in a bag if you know what you're going to use it for. If you're mulching on top of the garden, it's different application rather than you're incorporating it. So you do want smaller pieces that go into the soil as well. Stay away from the processed or dyed mulches. That's very important there. A lot of places will sell you dyed or black or brown colored mulch. You want all natural because you don't want any contaminants from maybe the dye that they use, things like that. So just watch out what you use for their own mulch. Humus basically is very similar to compost. What it does is that it helps break down soil imbalances and deficiencies. It's a very organic type product. I would almost consider compost and humus the same in their aspect of what they do. Like I said, they both improve your texture, help in water retention, and they do add some nutrient back into the soil. The next one is peat moss. We've all seen peat moss. It comes in those nice, great big square bundles or bales that are compressed. You get them at the box stores or the feed store, something like that. Their main goal is water retention. Basically, if you look at peat moss, it is a product that is several years old, probably millions of years old, basically that they mine in certain parts of the country. I know Canada has a lot of what they call peat bogs. And basically, it is just biodegraded plant material and animal material from many generations past. It's a great product, does great for water retention. That's probably another product that you really need to have on your list for really good organic soil amendments. And the last one is I put here wood products. And I'm gonna call this basically like almost like a mulch, but not quite a mulch. If you use say you had a ground up tree or something like that, that type of wood product is probably best as a topping on top of the soil for a water conservation problem. I would not try to incorporate a wood product like that, especially a very what we call fresh product, one that's just maybe been ground up. A lot of times it may create a nitrogen deficiency. So just watch out what you use there. Stephen, looks like we got a bunch of questions real quick.
Yes, sir. One primary question. There's been a lot of questions regarding administration of the chat function and their view. But one primary question from Margaret. She says that she hears that there's lots of mulch made using scrap lumber that might have been treated with chemicals. And how do you know what you're getting?
Good question. Definitely stay away from the pressure treated wood materials as a mulch or a wood product that you're going to incorporate into the soil. Basically, I hate to say it, but that's buyer beware. A lot of your cheaper type mulches will use that in some of their products. So if you know where you're getting your mulch from, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. You know, a lot of times it's basically ground up tree material. That's where a lot of our mulch comes from now is recycled tree waste or green waste. Try to minimize, products that have been treated with, pressure treated materials like the copper, chromium, arsenate and stuff like that. That's just something that I do my best not to use. And so that's why I use primarily as a mulch or a organic amendment. I stay away from the things like that unless I know where it came from. Okay, did that answer that question?
Yes, sir. Sure.
This is Boone. We've got to follow up with that concerning sawdust, potentially any impacts as far as nutrient robbing by using fresh sawmill sawdust.
Okay, so good question. I would say if it's fresh, it probably is going to rob a little bit of nitrogen. If they're going to use something like pine shavings, if they can sit and decompose a little bit, then I think they would be okay. If you go down to, say, Tractor Supply and buy a bag of the fresh pine shavings that you put in an animal bed for bedding, let those sit out for a while to break down a little bit, and I think you can probably get away with using those. I normally don't use shavings too much in my material, but I mean, it is a product that you can use. It definitely would be something that could be used, but fresh is not always best on that. So if it's open the bag and it smells like a pine tree, let it decompose quite a bit, and I think that definitely would help. Did that answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions real quick?
I just wanted to ask real quick. Due to the pandemic, I wasn't getting out much, so I had to use what I had around here for mulch. So what do you think about using just leaves and pine straw, stuff like that around the plants?
Love it.
I've always done that, but I just wanted,
Yep, that's great.
What about for the garden? I wanted to ask you about rice hulls. What do you think about using those to keep weeds from growing? I try to keep the weeds out myself. Yeah, rice hulls.
Okay.
Or
so again, that's one of those products. If you go out to Dogaze, and Dovey, it's nice to see you. If you go out to Dogaze and get them, and this, sorry y'all, this is one of my master gardeners. But if you go and pick up some rice hulls, make sure that they are decomposed or well decomposed. Obviously, you're going to probably get some fresher ones in there as well. But if you do, the longer they sit, the better they're going to be. They do take a while to break down, so just remember that. Are you going to use them for mulch or more of a soil amendment?
Mulch. Yeah, just to keep the weeds from coming back.
Okay.
I'm gonna try and my best to get all that taken care of before
Okay.
I plant my garden. But you know,
Gotcha. Yes, you can definitely use a layer of the rice hulls as well as a good mulch product, and that would work good. They are going to take a little bit longer to break down because they have a lignin material, so they are going to take a little bit longer to break down into the soil. So
okay.
they will decompose over time.
All right. Well, I'll let you get back then.
Okay. Thank you. Good question. Got one more question, Boone, I think, or
David, we're going to request that you proceed with your presentation. We thank all the viewers for, of course, participating with their questions. At this point, we are running a little short on time, so we'll ask.
I noticed. I'm a little bit. I'm gonna speed through it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So I've got to speed it up here just a little bit so we don't run out of time. But if you do have questions, guys, please feel free to email me directly or call me, and I'll be happy to visit with you. So here's some pictures really quick. Here's just a good picture of manures. This is a good picture of a compost bin. Notice all the materials that you're seeing in it. And then here's a picture of some mulches that I pulled up. Nondescript mulches. You can basically see how coarse they are. And here's a good picture of humus. This is a really good picture, what you need to add to your soil. This is a great product to add. Peat moss, it's basically a real fine material. It does good as well. And then the last one is the wood chips or the mulch. So mulch and wood chips are kind of synonymous, just depending on what you're going to use them for. But make sure you know what you are going to use them for and what their intended purpose is before you incorporate them into the soil. Again, on the wood, you don't want to use it if it's really fresh and kind of go from there. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right. So what are some issues affecting our soils and why do we need to add some amendments? And the list is pretty long and lengthy, but I think we can run through it pretty quick. If you have wet or anaerobic soils that basically don't drain, in my area, if we get a 2-inch rain, I'm going to have standing water on top of the ground for several days, and that's just because of my heavy clay soil that does not drain well. You guys have maybe heard about hard pan soils, where basically you got a little bit of layer of topsoil, and then all below it, it's basically like a layer of concrete sometimes that's just water doesn't drain. That can cause some issues. What about shallow soils? A lot of us may not have 2 feet of topsoil. We may have 6 inches, depending on where we're at in the state. That's always an issue as well. Compacted soils. If you have an area where you have a lot of construction or soil movement, or maybe just have a really heavy soil, those soils can become compacted and very tight in their porosity, and sometimes that's an issue. Variable types of soils in a particular area. Let's say that we have a variable type of soil, and we see that a lot in new construction, where maybe they had to bring in a lot of soil for a house, or maybe build up your house pad or something like that. They're going to bring in a lot more clay in a certain area, so you may run into that as well. And then, of course, soil structure and soil texture as well. We'll talk about those real quick in just a minute. All right. So that's kind of why we need to look at some other things. So when we talk about wet soils, we all seen it. I know I deal with it quite a bit. Standing water, poor drainage, anaerobic conditions. You guys have all seen the soil that has that nasty smell to it. Kind of looks like it's blue or a gray color. That is an anaerobic condition, and that basically means that soil is not good for growing anything. It's basically, it won't work well for growing a garden. So you do have to add drainage if you have conditions like this. All right. And then, of course, sometimes you have to provide external drainage. A lot of times, either it's subsurface, where you have to drain the water away from it just so you can get some water away from it, that you cancel out some of these standing water issues, things like that. All right, hard pan soils. I know we've run into it from time to time. If you dig down deep enough, you're going to see a layer, and if you'll look, you can see the definite layers on the right-hand side of the picture. Basically, it's just a hard layer of minerals and material, and a lot of times it's clay materials. And what that does is prevent water basically from draining all the way through. So basically, I like to tell people it's like a lasagna dish. You're going to have layers upon layer, and at some point, that bottom layer is going to be so hard that the juices and the material won't soak all the way through. So what are your choices? Best one is to break it up or dig it up. I put this little picture here at the bottom right. I felt like that sometimes. I had to jackhammer some really heavy soil, but it's pretty hard to correct some of these issues with hard pan soils. But amendments will help on some of these soils if you do have hard pan soils. All right, what about shallow soils? Let's say you live, on a very rocky area, or you get out closer to Central Texas area. A lot of times their soil is a lot thinner. If you do have shallow soils, drought tolerance is less. Plants will dry out very quickly. Plant anchorage. Myself here, I've seen a lot of trees blow over the last couple of weeks just due to all the wind and the hurricanes. A lot of times they just didn't have very good soil to anchorage in. And then it also has a reduced plant zone for growth. Again, this kind of goes back to your shallow soils, where if the soils are only 6 inches, then you only have 6 inches of growth for those roots, and they will be impacted in your garden. So if you have very shallow soils, amendments can be used to add to them as well. Okay, compacted soils. So if you have an area that has been heavily traveled or used, those soils tend to compact down. A lot of gardeners will fuss at you if you walk in their garden because you're compacting the soil. Basically, you want that nice fluffy soil that, basically just pick it up and it's like a heavy flour mixture almost, rather than sometimes you pick it up, it's like picking up a brick. Water's not going to go through that brick as well as it would through like a flour mixture. So we do have compacted soils in a lot of part of the state. Poor drainage is the big thing, obviously. Poor root growth, and then they tend to dry out as quickly. You'll notice that the pore space is the big thing. So on the left, you see a heavily compacted picture where the pores are very tight, very close together. Water's going to have a hard time infiltrating through those pictures, whereas on the right, the pore spaces are bigger. They're a little bit smaller. The pore spaces are larger. Excuse me. I'll get it straight in a minute. They're larger, and they tend to basically allow more water to travel through there. So that is on compacted soils. So if you do have compacted soils, your materials that you can add will definitely improve that as well. All right, here's a picture of my variable types of soils. Notice the guy digging the hole. Same within a 10-foot distance, he's got 2 different types of soils. Basically, if you have a variable soil, not consistent over specific areas, and that would be hard to accommodate multiple crops. Again, you want a good uniform mixture of soil. You don't want clay on one end of your garden and sand on the other. So if you can make a good homogeneous mixture, that's what we're looking for in a soil. You can fix that again with the addition of a lot of our amendments, such as your bark or maybe your peat moss, things like that. And again, just to get a good even mixture throughout your area. All right, real quick on soil structure. When we talk about soil structure, this is how the soil particles are arranged, whether they're, all close together. And we talked about this just a second ago. It's called compact. So if we have a real heavy clay soil, the pore spaces are going to be very tight. You're going to have a lot less water infiltration versus a soil that is basically very loose and granular. The way I look at it is if it's granular, the water can still creep through there and go, but it's going to be a lot easier for it, less restrictive. So if it's a good structure, it holds water and has airspace. But if it's a poor structure, it's basically going to be great big pores, and it's going to be hard for that water to go through there, and you're going to have less water retention. Okay. All right, real quick, soil texture. This is the big one here, depending on what kind of soil you have. If you have a sandy, loamy, or a clayey soil, that basically tells you how much water capacity you have. Here in my area, I have heavy clay, so I have lots of water holding capacity. If you go to the Galveston Beach, they have less water holding capacity, so those sandy soils dry out very quickly. So you do have to water very more often than say here in Beaumont area with clay soils. And then the permeability, basically it's just the opposite. A lot of sand, it goes through there very quickly. A loamy material kind of in the middle, and then a clay soil, heavy clay soil, will have less permeability. And this is another reason that we add a lot of our materials to our soils to improve this texture and basically the holding capacity and the permeability of those soils, whether we want to add nutrients to that soil to increase or decrease that water holding capacity. All right. So how do you know if you need to add something to your soil? This is a great place to start. I know we probably hadn't talked a lot about soil tests, but if you haven't done a soil test on your garden, this is a really quick, easy way to start. Usually about 10 or 15 bucks for a very good soil test. But this will give you a good jumping off point. You'll see that it basically tells you your pH. So if you look at that pH, and mine on this sample was a 6.9, so that's not terrible. It's a little high for what we were doing here. So we may need to add some materials to reduce that pH a little bit. It will also tell you if you need to add limestone or anything like that, but it'll also tell you your fertilizer requirement for what you were planting as well. So, you know, it's a good insurance policy, and it will basically kind of help you figure out what you need to add to that garden soil. So that's a good point to talk about. Again, excuse me, $10 or $15 is a good insurance, and it kind of gives you a jumping off point for what you need to talk about on your soil amendments and what you may or may not need to add. Okay, again, I told you I'll talk a lot about compost. Real quick, we consider it a soil amendment more than a fertilizer. A lot of people that are trying to be organic will not add a lot of commercial fertilizers. They have to do some different things in. But if you're just adding soil or compost as strictly your type of fertilizer, you're not going to have a lot of fertilizer in that soil. You're going to have a little bit, but not quite as much. The key thing is that it helps restore the soil biology. It brings back a lot of the microbes and the mycorrhizae in the soil as well. So basically, you're adding a lot of organic material back into that soil as well. Again, well decomposed is best. You don't want to tie up your nitrogen if you have a heavy bark material in it, things like that. And then if it is composted, it will basically reduce the need for soil-borne diseases. If you've done a lot of composting of material from your garden, like food scraps and plant waste, you do want to compost it very heavily. And then a typical analysis is not a lot. So if you're looking for fertilizer for this, you're going to get 1 to 2% fertilizer, which is not a lot, depending, but it is a good natural source of fertilizer for your garden. All right. So on compost, the main thing that it does is that it basically helps soil aggregates. You're going to improve your water flow. It's going to improve that soil structure. We talked about structure a while ago, where basically you want to have a good middle of the road type pore space for these materials. It also helps water absorption and infiltration. And it actually will help with soil erosion in certain cases. Basically, it takes away a lot of the smaller pieces and a lot of the bigger pieces, and it gets kind of in the middle of the road. And it does work to reduce your soil erosion as well. Let's see what else I had. So there's a picture of a compost bin. This is not mine, obviously, but we have a really nice one that we use for our demonstration purposes. And we start with unfinished products such as leaves and things like that. And then it basically will go into a lighter material. And at the end, this is what you should be looking for. And this is a great material to add to your gardens. If you do have the opportunity to do a compost bin or something like that, I definitely would. You'll notice here that it does take a while for it to break down. Basically, you're heating this material. It is an exothermic, so it does produce heat. If you do compost, it needs to be about 130 to 140 degrees, and then it'll start cooling down. But that is a good option to use for a soil amendment. And like I said, if you do have an opportunity to use that, I definitely would use that compost. Real quick, I think we're almost to the end. So if you do have to use a fertilizer, a lot of people like to use organic fertilizers, and these can include manures, blood or bone meals, and cottonseed meals. You have to kind of know what you're using on this as well. If you are using it, it probably is more expensive. A lot of us will, say you're planting certain vegetables or even, shrubbery or plants, use the addition of blood and bone meal sometimes, depending on what we're doing. It's not available till the plants break it down, so it does take a little bit longer. It's not a fast-acting type material if you're using a organic material such as your blood or your bone meals. And then, of course, a lot of us use the inorganic type, which is basically our commercially produced fertilizers. And we always see those in bags and, several combinations. You're always going to see 3 numbers on there, N, P, and K. Again, I can talk a lot about this as well, but you need to know what type of nitrogen or what percentage, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to use. Again, that goes back to your soil test. So if you've had a soil test, it'll tell you how much you need for your soil and your specific soil. All right. So here's a quick recap on some creating good quality garden soil. Add the addition of amendments as needed. If you don't need sand, don't add sand. If you drainage is good, then you may not need to add anything for drainage. Just kind of know what you're working with. Drainage is probably one of the best things that we need to talk about on that as well. You don't want waterlogged soils. You want a soil that's well drained, that has some water holding capacities. You don't want it to be a bone dry soil, but you need some water in there as well. I always tell people to utilize crop rotation as well. If you plant the same thing in the same spot over and over and over, you're going to deplete the soil of nutrients. So crop rotation is important. And here's one that we didn't talk about, but I think is important. You want to minimize your soil tillage in your garden. You don't want soil that's completely pulverized into a dust. When you do that, you break down and you lose a lot of those materials just due to weathering, things like that. But you don't have to till it all the time, every time. If you till that garden once or twice, or you break up that soil, as long as you can work that soil and plant what you need to plant, then you're okay. Then I put in here cover crops as well. It's important to use cover crops for additional nitrogen input back into the soil, and then addition of organic material and other materials to improve your soil, and that's going to be your compost and humus and things like that. All right, that's it. All I have. I hope that was something interesting. This is my contact information. I know we had quite a few people had some questions. Like I said, this will be on the slide, but if you want to call me or email me, I'd love to visit with you. If I can help, please let me know. And the last one is talking about next week. They're going to talk about turf grass. So Mr. Potter, Montgomery County, will talk about turf grass next week. Does anybody have any questions that I can answer real quick? That's all I had.
David, this is Stephen.
Yes, sir.
And thank you again for the outstanding presentation. One question is,
Sure.
We know the what, but they would one of the participants would like to know how to add amendments to the soil. How do we need to mix it in?
Good question. A lot of times, basically, depending on the amendment, let's take compost and manure as an example. Let's say you have a garden that you're going to work, or a raised bed. Normally what I would do would be to top dress or to add 1 or 2 inches of that material on the top of your existing soil, and to till it in or to hand mix it in to a depth of about 8 to 12 inches. That's the kind of key root zone, is 8 to 12 inches on your soil. So basically top dress it and then incorporate it by either tilling it in or mix it again with a spade or something like that. That would be the best way to do it. So obviously, if you've got sand, you don't need 2 inches of sand, but maybe do it 1 inch. If you say you got to add some sand to your soil, lay 1 inch down, top dress it, and then incorporate it. And if you need to add more, you can do that. So it's easier to add more, but it's hard to take it away. So do a layer and then mix it in really good, and then to add another layer if you need to. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, it does. As far as, and again, is this, are you recommending for vegetable production versus ornamental?
Actually, I do it both ways. I hate to say that. Depending on if you're vegetable, send me your question again, Stephen. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. What you just described is great for establishment of a bed,
Yes.
10 to 12 inches. If there's an ornamental landscape and a person is encouraged to incorporate organic matter into that. So not treating it as a mulch per se, not on top of the soil, but adding that to an existing ornamental landscape.
I got you. Okay. Yeah, a little bit different if you're trying to improve the soil on an already established plant, I guess. Maybe that's what I'm thinking at. If you've got let's say you've got a new shrub that you're planting, it's a little bit different. For vegetables, we want a somewhat of a raised type bed that we can utilize. If we're planting like I say, a shrub, we can normally do a lot more of our amendments through the top dressing, things like that. I always hate to say it on a soil, if you're planting something with a much larger root system like that, then basically I want that plant to utilize the existing soil that it has, and I can add things to it, but I don't want to completely change that soil for a larger type plant. So I hate to say it's tough love for a lot of these larger trees and shrubs, but we want them in the existing soil if possible, so that they will acclimate and do better and not, die off in a year or two because the roots don't want to spread out into that tougher soil, so to speak. Does that make sense?
It does. So just to kind of encapsulate, treat it more as a mulch rather than incorporating into the soil. Gotcha.
Yes, absolutely. Good question.
And I guess one additional question is, when is the best time to add amendments?
Oh, good question. I normally add mine, if I'm going to do amendments, I like to add my amendments in the fall. Let's just say I'm going to do a spring garden and I want to add amendments to my soil. I will add them in the fall and incorporate them, and then let that garden rest for the winter season. And that way, when I go into the spring season, it's already mixed in, it's incorporated. And if those materials need to break down, they've already had 90 days to break down or so. So I would definitely do a lot of my garden amendments in the fall season. And that way, that if you do a spring garden or a late winter spring garden, your amendments are already incorporated and they've had time to acclimate, and it's not such a culture shock, so to speak. Good question.
I guess we'll wind this up, David, with one last question. A gentleman asked about a product I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but a product called Azomite, Azomite.
I've heard of it. It rings a bell, but my mind's not thinking this morning. Give me a minute. I sit there and look at it. I can't think what it does. Oh no.
Well, basically,
I'll get you off the ropes, David.
Thank you.
Basically, it's a combination of trace minerals for remineralization of soils that have maybe been gardened in for a number of years.
Okay. I sit there and look at it. I couldn't think. Okay. So the question is, would you use that material as an amendment as well? Is that the question?
I think the answer is basically for us to go back and every two years and conduct a soil sample. If he wants to look for the micronutrients in the soil, is just to make sure that he has a well-balanced mineral level in the soil. But I guess the short answer would be that it probably wouldn't hurt, but we're not sure without a soil sample what you would gain from it.
Yeah. When in doubt, I always encourage folks to do a soil test. That's $10 or $15 for, I call it my insurance policy, because basically you've had that soil tested and you know what you're dealing with, and you're not just guessing and just kind of going out there and, well, I'm going to add, a pound of this or 5 pounds of that or whatever. And so that basically is a good insurance policy that I like to tell people to use. So that works. I like your answer. That's a good answer.
Research and example shows azomite provides micronutrients in the inorganic fashion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a ground aged silica. It can be available at granular form for longer lasting from Ace Hardware.
Okay.
They carry the whole line of Phos chemicals.
Okay.
Also, when you're planting trees, especially fruit trees, some near the edge of your hole, your basin, you can use some azomite there. And also, back to soil texture, if you use coarse mulch, like 1/4 and 1/2 inch near the outside and bottom of the hole, as well as some gravel or mixed rock and twig branches, the roots will have something to grab onto for better anchor.
Correct. That larger, well, I'll say larger, but that mid-sized material basically will give you better adhesion for your roots to basically move through and develop a better root system. So yes, that is true. That is good.
Especially for anchor against our winds and erosion.
Absolutely. We've had most of our trees here were either snapped off or basically, like you saw in the pictures, the whole thing the wind basically just turned them upside down. But that's just because of our winds that we had a couple of weeks ago. So,
thank you for your presentation.
Good deal. Thank you. Lots of good questions. I appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
All right, folks. David, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, guys.
Today.
As always.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Like I said, if you guys have questions, please email me or contact me or your local agent as well. Any of us would be happy to help you guys and then answer your questions if we can. So appreciate it very much. And thank you for taking time out of your Wednesday as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We hope